Okay, we have a recorded session now on the middle ear. We're going to spend 2 weeks on this particular topic. Last week we spent on the outer ear, but the outer ear is quite simple. So we covered anatomy and physiology, form and function, what it is and how it works. In other words, we could do that all in 1 week. The middle ear is a bit more complicated. We'll cover middle ear anatomy mainly this week, and we'll cover middle ear physiology mainly next week. Then it'll be time to work into the inner ear, but that's mañana, later down the road. So why don't we just share screen here, and I will pull up what we've got in terms of our notes. And here's middle ear anatomy and physiology. There's one's readings of it. And basically, I think the handout, if we're looking at the handout, it's got like 1 page, and it goes on to middle ear muscles, and then there's the physiology of the middle ear. Middle ear overcomes impedance mismatch. Now we're on page 3 of 4. Conductive hearing loss, however, is much more. Resonances of middle ear, acoustic reflexes, common misconception about acoustic reflexes, and disorders of the middle ear. We have another course on disorders at OTC. We have a separate course, but this gives you kind of like it'll give you a preview of that. So I'm hoping we get done the first couple of pages out of this here handout, because it's got 4 pages all told. Alrighty, and when we take a peek at the middle ear, your very first slide, having a good look over here. Ear canal, ear drum, much shaped like a speaker cone. And then you can see the malleus, incus, and stapes bones. You can see that the malleus is literally attached onto the back of the eardrum. You'd have to tear it off, in other words. These here have a joint right here. Notice that the manubrium bone has this part and a handle. They call this the manubrium, manu, hand. Here's the incus. It has a long process and a short process. Then here's the stapes bone with its neck, with its crura, and the last one part is its foot plate, the foot plate of the stapes. The stapes is situated inside what is called the oval window, and this is the entrance to the inner ear. Now, when the oval window pushes in, the round window bulges out. This is a small membrane. Remember, this whole inner ear is filled with fluid. So when the oval window pushes in, the fluid bulges out the round window. Looking at this whole space, essentially it's air-filled. The middle ear is known to be what they call a closed space. I always call it like government offices, closed unless forced open. Okay, you've got your eustachian tube here, and that's the main opening to the middle ear. It's closed, and it opens temporarily when you swallow. So when you swallow, it cracks open just a bit and then closes again. That allows you to get added air into this middle ear space. Very important that your eustachian tubes down to the back of your throat work properly. We have 2 eustachian tubes, one for the right, one for the left, and they end just near your tonsils at the back of your throat. And I don't want anybody putting their fingers back there, but if you did feel around, you'd feel 2 little openings at the back of your throat. Those are the openings to your eustachian tube. So now we'll go into the notes here and see what we've got. Okay, middle ear consists of the inner skin of your tympanic membrane. Remember, your eardrum has 3 layers. It's the only part of your body that retains 3 layers. The ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. The ectoderm in gestation, when you are an embryo, even before you are a fetus, the ectoderm forms skin and nerves. Mesoderm forms muscles and bones. And endoderm forms anything slimy in your body. Your guts, your intestines, the inside of your cheeks, all of that, anything that's slippery and slidey. So basically the eardrum is the one piece of your anatomy that preserves all three of those original skin layers or tissues. So the inner skin of your tympanic membrane is continuous. So the layer of skin here is continuous with the lining of tissue around the middle ear space. It's mucosal. It's sticky to the touch. Nice. Anyway, then the eustachian tube, realize, the middle ear space is closed, lined with a mucus layer, surrounded by porous mastoid bone. So the bone surrounding most of the middle ear space is continuous with the bone that is right behind your ear. Remember, we covered the temporal bone as the side bone of the skull. It consists of a soft mastoid portion as well as a hard petrous portion. The petrous portion surrounds mainly the inner ear, and the mastoid portion surrounds mostly the outer and middle ears. It's soft and porous. Eustachian tube continues down to the throat. You need this to open and let new air in here, and the reason why is because this tissue here is always absorbing oxygen. The lining of the middle ear space has tons of little capillaries, tiny little blood vessels, and they're always absorbing oxygen. And if they were to constantly absorb oxygen, you'd get a vacuum in this space, and the eardrum would be sucked inward. So you have the eustachian tube to always let new air in there. If you didn't have this functioning properly, you're going to have a major problem in Houston, okay, other than Tracy or Harvey. So I don't mean to be crass because that's a horrible thing. Anyway, the middle ear ossicles, the malleus, incus, stapes, and ligaments. So look again, the ossicles, and here's the ligaments, holding the ossicles in place. And then you will talk about two middle ear muscles, and we'll look at those later. They are connected to the middle ear bones. Let's see if I can show a picture of the muscles, because this doesn't, here you go, this shows it a little bit. Here's one of those muscles. Can you see the, and this kind of shows a little better. You can see the ligaments, ligament, ligament, and you can see a muscle here, and you'll see a muscle here. Now this is called the tensor tympani muscle, and it's attached to the malleus, and this is called the stapedius muscle, and it's attached to the neck of the stapes. Now those two muscles, when they pull, it's called the acoustic reflex. It's beyond your control. Just like if you have your legs crossed and a doctor taps your knee with a hammer, your foot sticks out. Okay, just like when you touch a hot stove and you, okay, it's reflex action. You really don't have much control over that. And the acoustic reflex is what it's called. And the acoustic reflex is like, it occurs when loud sounds are sent to the ear. And it pulls those muscles, and when it tightens those muscles, then the middle ear doesn't work very well for a split second. When those muscles pull, they make the middle ear even more stiff, and the middle ear tends not to work as well. And that's good. That's nature's way of stopping the loud sounds from coming in. And we'll talk more about the reason you have the acoustic reflex and later on as we go through this section. Actually, I'll tell you why you have it. The main reason you've got the acoustic reflex is because it dulls the loudness of your own voice while you talk. And then you think of it, I'll stop sharing here. When you look and you think about, if you ever listen to a recording of your own voice and you're the only one who hates it, everyone else thinks it sounds just like you. And you're thinking, nah, that doesn't sound like me. Well, Houston, that is the way other people hear you. That's because you hear yourself through the air as well as through the bone. So others hear you just through the air. When you're hearing a recording of your voice, you're hearing yourself just through sound waves, through the air. But when you yourself talk, you're hearing yourself through the air here, but also through the bone. So you hear yourself louder, because when you talk, it resonates the mass of your skull, and low frequencies resonate mass. So you hear yourself a bit lower pitched and a bit rounder, a bit richer. When you hear a recording of your voice, you're hearing yourself as others hear you. And that's only through the air. And you sound a bit more tinny. You don't sound quite as natural. And I think I said last week, it sucks to be you because my voice sounds like geese farts on a muggy day. And you're the ones who have to listen to it, okay? Hey, we got another joiner. Good stuff. You haven't missed too much. We have just begun a bit of the middle ear. We're on the section of the middle ear, and we're largely covering the notes of the middle ear and a PowerPoint here. So we've gone over the basic parts of the middle ear. The inner lining of the tympanic membrane. It's a closed space filled with air. The eustachian tube allows new air to get up into it. The middle ear ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes and their ligaments, and two middle ear muscles, the tensor tympani and the stapedius. So here we go. Parts of the middle ear. Recall the temporal bone has two parts, a soft mastoid portion and a hard petrous portion. The mastoid portion surrounds the ear canal and part of the middle ear space. The hard petrous portion of the temporal bone surrounds the inner ear, the vestibular system, balance organs, and cochlea. The closed middle ear space. How big is the middle ear space? When we look at the middle ear space, this guy right here, it's about the size of a sugar cube, a little smaller. Okay, about a couple of cubic centimeters. It really isn't very much. Quite small in size, really. Looking over here, this is kind of a schematic of the middle ear. And it's, once again, it's showing you the ear canal. You can see the eardrum. You can see the malleus, incus, and stapes bones. Look at how the malleus, this is called the manubrium, manu for handle. And then this part of the malleus bone is attached to the back of the eardrum. And notice, it's not attached to the whole back of the eardrum, just to the top half. From the tippy top here down to the umbo, to the center of the eardrum. Nothing is attached to the bottom half of the drum. And then you have the incus bone with its long process and its short process. And then you have the neck of the stapes, the crura of the stapes, and the foot plate of the stapes, fitting inside what's called the oval window. And then over here is the bone called the promontory, and I'll show you what that looks like on this slide. That would be this, the promontory. The oval window, the foot plate of the stapes in the oval window, the promontory, and the round window. And on the schematic, the oval window, okay, here, the oval window, the promontory, and the RW, round window. Eustachian tube going down to your throat. And here you've got the stapedius muscle and the tensor tympani muscle. The tensor tympani muscle is attached to the malleus. The stapedius muscle is attached to the neck of the stapes. Oh, nice slide, Ted. This is what a camera looks like when you're looking at the sun. Great. Here's a slide of Canada in the wintertime. All right, here we go. And again, another shot of the middle ear. Ear canal. Here's the eardrum. Remember the cone shape like a speaker. Manubrium of the malleus, the part of the malleus attached to the back of the drum. The incus bone with its short process, long process, stapes bone with its neck, crura, and then the foot plate of the stapes, situated inside the oval window. And here's the promontory of bone, and then here would be the round window. Now look at the size of the eardrum relative to the size of the foot plate of the stapes. And you can see that this is a whole lot bigger. The stapes is very small, and the size of the drum is much larger. It's 17 times larger in area than the footplate of the stapes is. There's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that more later on. Let's go back to our notes and make sure we're following closely here. So we keep the PowerPoint and the notes in constant sequence with each other. Don't worry about memorizing the height and the depth of the middle ear space. I really don't care. Just remember it's about the size of a sugar cube, okay? The mucous membrane is the lining of the entire middle ear space. It includes the inside of the tympanic membrane, like the third layer of the tympanic membrane, the inner layer, in other words, and the eustachian tube. All of these are slimy. The jugular vein lies just below the floor of the middle ear space, your jugular vein. Now, think about, it's not really shown here, and it's not really shown here, not much, and it's not really shown here that much. But let's get a grip of the difference between veins and arteries, okay? Arteries carry red blood, and arteries carry new red blood full of oxygen from the heart to your body. That blood is crimson red. The redder your blood is, the more oxygen it carries. Arteries are what pound. So when you think of your heartbeat, you put your hand against your wrist and you feel the boom, boom, boom. That's an artery. Your aorta artery in your heart, big, thick arteries do the with the heart. They're sending rich air, oxygen-filled blood to the rest of your body to feed your body. Veins carry old, tired blood back to the heart. Veins don't pump. Veins just sort of sluggish, and the blood is purple. The blood is no longer red like my shirt. It's more purplish because it's depleted of oxygen. It doesn't have as much, okay? So that blood is no longer as red. Now you've got we got an artery and you have a vein right near the middle ear space. You have what's called the carotid artery, C-A-R-O-T-I-D. If I share a screen, I'll bet you dollars to donuts it's on your handout here. So if I read this, yep, sure enough, you'd think I wrote this. Carotid artery, okay, sits behind the front wall. It's just not in you can't see it in the pictures, okay? The front wall of your middle ear space. And you got your jugular vein lying just below the floor of your middle ear space. So that's why in some people they say they can hear a little bit of their heartbeat. There's a bit of a, and that's a bit of that's the pumping of their carotid artery right near the middle ear space. I just thought I'd tell you that. It's epitympanic recess. That's the middle ear space just above your eardrum and malleus. The space above your eardrum and malleus. It's a space. So in anatomy, not only are the parts given names, but the spaces are given names as well. And then you've got something called additus ad antrum. That's above the incus and stapes. So the additus ad antrum, whoa, I just moved the whole picture here. Don't do that, Ted. Anyway, you really don't want to mess with that. Anyway, so the additus ad antrum is sitting here. Okay, so these things are given different names. No matter. Okay, and then you have something called the chorda tympani nerve. It's a branch of your seventh facial nerve that passes through the middle ear space. Okay, let's make sense of this here. You have, when your spinal cord enters your skull. Your spinal cord starts at your rear end, go up your back, and it enters your skull. It enters a big hole at the bottom of your skull called the magnum foramen. Big hole, it means. So it goes in there. By the way, just so you get a, you know how thick your spinal cord is? About like your finger. It's not very thick. It's not like some big fat thing, okay? But the spinal cord enters the bottom of your skull, and as soon as it enters your skull, it's now called your brain stem. The brain stem goes up and ends like a fist at the bottom at your brain, and then your brain surrounds it. Your cortex surrounds the top of your brain stem, and your brain stem leaves, and when it exits the skull, it's called your spinal cord. Now, off your spinal cord, you've got 30-some pairs of nerves, okay? Some nerves for your arms, for your legs, all that stuff, all these different branches, a left and a right, blop, 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 pairs of nerves. When you enter your skull, your brain stem, okay, it's only an inch long. Your brain stem is only an inch long, but it has 12 pairs of nerves going off of it. Those are called your cranial nerves. You got 12 pairs. Here I'm only showing you 4 pairs, okay? Or 5, I guess. But think of 12 pairs. 8th pair is your auditory nerve. The first pair is your optic nerves. And I don't know what all some of them, the 7th facial nerve, the 7th pair is for your cheeks to smile. It's what pulls your cheeks apart. So when people get something called Bell's palsy, you ever heard of Bell's palsy? Mm-hmm. Bell's palsy is paralysis of one of your 7th nerves. And so your face is like pulled over to the side. When that happens, you go, this cranial 7th nerve is right. It's pulling. It's making my face have its tension. But this one is paralyzed. It's not holding my face even. So it's pulled this way. We used to have a prime minister in Canada. His name was Jean Chrétien. He had Bell's palsy. And so his face was always a little bit pulled over to the side like this. He says, a Frenchman, he could talk, you know, he was a nice guy. But he would say, at least they cannot accuse me from talking from both sides of my mouth. It's funny. I like that. He's still living. He's hilarious. Anyway, so when we go to our notes here, you take a look at the the chorda tympani nerve. That's a nerve. It's a branch of your 7th facial nerve. It's the 7th pair of cranial nerves that passes through the middle ear space. It can get in the way of middle ear surgery. What does that nerve do? It carries taste information from the frontal 2/3 of one side of your tongue. Interesting. It's just know that there's a branch of the 7th facial nerve that courses through the middle ear space. When you think of the inner ear wall of the middle ear space, the inner ear wall, well, let's look at that. Here's the inner ear wall, right here where I'm circling. Okay, this whole inner ear wall. The main 3 things to know are oval window, promontory, round window. When the oval window pushes in, the round window bulges out. If they couldn't alternate, you'd have a hearing loss. Okay? Think about if you get a middle ear infection and all this area gets filled with pus. Now, when the oval window tries to push in, this round window can't bulge out. It's all pus in here that's holding it still. So you're going to get some hearing loss due to that. We'll talk more about that later. Right now, we're just going over the pieces and parts. The eustachian tube itself connects the middle ear to what's called the nasopharynx. In English, the nasopharynx is your throat. Nasopharynx is your throat. Okay? Nasopharynx, throat. Cilia, hairs, tiny hairs in your eustachian tube. Tiny little hairs are always moving like this. And they're always moving particles away from your middle ear down to your throat. It's naturally what occurs. Your eustachian tube is always closed unless you swallow or yawn or blow your nose really hard, and then that pop, you'll feel it in your ears. That's the opening of your eustachian tube for a split second. Your eustachian tube also opens once a minute while awake and about once every 5 minutes when you're asleep, letting new air come up into your middle ear space. An infant eustachian tube is shorter, wider, and more horizontal. Now here I'm going to show you a picture if I've got it, and I believe I do in this PowerPoint. So we'll go down here, see if we can show it. Here you go. Here's a kid. Look at this little fella here. When you're looking at the little boy, you can see his ear canal. You see his middle ear space, cochlea, balance organs, and here's the eustachian tube. Look at how horizontal it is. And that's because little kids have shorter faces. Here's an adult skull compared to a baby skull. Not only is the adult skull larger, but the adult skull is more elongated. It's longer. So your face grows longer. And when your face grows longer, your eustachian tubes get more vertical. And when your eustachian tubes are more vertical, they don't get infected as easy. Infection can easily come from this child's tonsils more easily up to the middle ear space. That's why it's not a good idea for mothers who are nursing a baby. It's not good for the mother to lay on her side, because then the baby is swallowing while lying down, and that milk can get up into the middle ear space. It's always better to nurse a baby sitting upright. These are all things that we learn as we improve our knowledge base of things. But this is why children are more susceptible to earaches and ear infections than adults. And you might recall having earaches or ear infections as a child, but most people grow out of them as you get older, and you don't get them as much anymore. And it has a lot to do with the shape of the skull. It's kind of interesting, just as a note of passage here. When you're developing in utero, in your mother, there's 3 parts of your face that come together. You have this side, and you got that little thing under your nose. You ever wonder what that little thing is? That thing is called a philtrum. 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 And the reason you have that little thing under your nose is that's where the angels in heaven pushed you out of heaven when you were born. Okay, they pushed you here. Okay, actually, what happens is this little thing is continuous with here and here. See these? I know my teeth are ugly, but one tooth, next one, next one, next one. Your 4 front teeth, your 4 front incisors. The division between your canine teeth and your first incisor is continuous with the outer edge of that philtrum. This philtrum here is continuous with right there, between that canine tooth and this one. Children born with cleft palate, okay, those 3 pieces didn't grow together right. Either one side didn't grow together right, or both sides didn't grow together right. And then that child, there's a cleft here. And then they have to sew that back together. But you'll often hear that those kids, they're talking a whole lot like this all the time, because they don't have a closed palate up at the top. Air is escaping out of their nose. But the 3 pieces did not grow quite right together. I don't know, it's just something I throw in there. It's not a lie, it's true, but anyway. All right. Now here we go. So let's escape here. Let's go to this screen and go back to where we were. All right. And let's look at our notes. Okay. Infant eustachian tube shorter, wider, more horizontal. Therefore, they are more susceptible to conductive hearing loss. Circle that word. Remember what we said last week and in the weeks before. There are two types of hearing loss. One type is conductive, the other type is called sensory neural. Sensory being S-E-N, I should say, S-E-N-S-O-R-I dash neural, N-E-U-R-A-L. In abbreviation, we call that S-N-H-L, sniffle. You're going to see that word for the rest of your lives in this career, because that's what most people have. If I stop sharing and just talk to you, if you have problems with your outer ear, wax, or if you have an ear infection of your middle ear, pus, those two causes block the passage of sound. They block, so they, just like electricity gets conducted in a wire, so that's why they call it conductive. So if I show you here an electrical cord, okay, it conducts electricity. So conductive hearing loss is something like mechanical. When you think of conductive hearing loss, think of putting an earplug in your ear. You're going to go outside and mow the lawn and it's noisy. You want to protect your ears, so you wear earplugs. You're giving yourself a conductive hearing loss on purpose. Okay, you're putting a plug in your ear to block the conduction of sound to your inner ear. And you want that because you're trying to protect your inner ears. So you're giving yourself a hearing loss on purpose, temporarily, while you're wearing the headphones. So when you think of the word conductive hearing loss, always think of a plug in your ear. That plug might be wax, that plug might be a middle ear infection. Either one. No yawning. I'm just teasing you. Okay, sensory neural loss, on the other hand, that's damage to the inner ear cochlea. Meaning there's no problem with sound conduction getting to where it's got to go. Not at all. The outer ear is fine. The middle ear has no ear infection whatsoever. It's that hair cells inside of your inner ear itself are damaged. They're not like standing like this, they're gone. And when you have missing hair cells, it's like me going to the back of your eyeballs going, scratching the retinas. Okay? Retinal problems of the eye are rare. Only 5% of vision loss is caused by retinal damage. Most vision loss is conductive. Light isn't properly getting to the back of your eye, so you buy these things, and these things refocus the light properly on the back of the eye. God's in his heaven and all's well with the world. Hearing aids, it's not like that. 95% of hearing loss is not outer ear caused, is not middle ear caused. 95% of hearing loss is inner ear caused. And those hair cells are dead. And that's like the retina of the eyeball itself is ruined. So that's why hearing aids are called hearing aids. They aid. They're not hearing repair. They help. Okay, so always keeping that in mind. Always be very, very clear of that. So here, when you've got conductive hearing loss, middle ear problems give conductive hearing loss. That's why kids with earaches are more susceptible to conductive hearing loss. And I'll give you a little head start or a heads up. When you're doing hearing testing, when you learn your audiometry course next semester, you're going to be putting headphones on the ear, and the headphone is going to deliver sound here, and the guy's going to raise his hand when he hears a tone. Then you're going to test his left ear, and he'll raise a hand when he hears the tone. Then you're going to take the headphones off, place them on the table, and you're going to take a headband, and it's going to sit on the head, and it's going to wrap around, and the box is going to sit on that bone behind your ear. And tones will be delivered that way. And then the guy's raising his hand again. Conductive loss means headphones, lots of decibels required to just barely hear. The guy's got a hearing loss here, hearing loss here. Okay, take the headphones off, put the bone oscillator on, and bypass the outer ear, bypass the middle ear, and the kid hears like a baby, all the way down to 0. So you go, If I bypass the outer and middle ear and send the sound by bone conduction, kid hears normally. If I deliver the sound by air conduction through a headphone, big hearing loss. Tells me A, the amount of hearing loss, and B, the type. Now I can tell a doctor, yep, this is consistent with a middle ear infection. When we're not even doctors, and yet we can tell how much hearing loss a person has and also where the problem is just by doing a hearing test. That's why a hearing test is kind of diagnostic. It's really interesting. We're becoming kind of like doctors in a way. We can assess the health of the outer ear and the middle ear and the inner ear. We know where the problem is. I'll tell you a safe way to stay out of trouble with a doctor. Always say, my hearing test results are consistent with middle ear infection, or my hearing test results are consistent with sensory neural hearing loss. That's a good way to keep your nose clean and not get a doctor's feathers ruffled. Okay? Just FYI, for your information, that's just something I've learned to do. All righty. Okay. Here's another very important thing to keep in mind. These two italicized sentences. Air pressure has to be even Steven on both sides of the drum for the middle ear to work properly. Here's what I mean. Look at here. Air pressure has to be, room air pressure here has to be matched with regular room air pressure there. If the air pressure on either side of the drum is uneven with itself, you've got a problem. Let me put it this way. If you've got negative air pressure here, then this had better be negative. But who wants negative air pressure? Otherwise, you're living in a vacuum. Basically, if this is room air pressure here, this needs to be room air pressure here. If it's not, you're going to get a conductive hearing loss. So what happens to a child who's getting a middle ear infection? Well, sore throat, tonsils are swollen. Now the tonsils, because they're swollen, this eustachian tube no longer opens when you swallow. But yet the lining of the middle ear space continues to absorb oxygen. No new air can get in here because this is swollen shut. So now you're getting a vacuum in the middle ear space. And now the air pressure is negative here, and it's room air pressure there. Problems. Okay? That's what's going to cause an earache. That's what earaches are. Uneven air pressure. And then later on, this negative air pressure causes fluid to come out of the walls of the middle ear space, and fluid begins to form inside that middle ear space. Want to see a picture of that? What the heck? Let's look at that. What would that fluid look like? See if I got a picture of it. We should have a picture of it. Come on. Oh, yeah, here you go. Fluid behind the eardrum. This is negative air pressure. Look at that eardrum. It's sucked back. It's laying on the promontory bone. As Joe Pesci would say in that movie Casino when he's got that head in a vice, that's gotta hurt. Okay? So look at the eardrum is sucked back onto, you can see the footplate, the long process of the incus against the stapes here. The eardrum is literally sucked all the way back across the room of the middle ear space. Then it rebels. There's fluid begins to build up, and it's clear fluid like under a blister. They call that serous fluid, S-E-R-O-U-S, serous. We'll see this in your notes later. The next stage is pus. Now the middle ear is bulging. You can see the umbo in the center, but now it's like this. Instead of being sucked back, now it's bulging. This also hurts like hell. They put tubes in the middle ear because the child still has a short face, is always going to get plugged up eustachian tubes, so they often make a hole in the eardrum and stick something in there to keep that hole open. And after a few months, this falls out and the little hole heals by itself. Okay, but these are called tubes in the eardrum to alleviate the problem called otitis media. Oto, ear, itis, inflammation, media, middle ear infection, otitis media. What's a treatment for otitis media? Antibiotics. What's another treatment for otitis media? Tubes in the ear. What's another treatment for otitis media? Tonsillectomy. Remove the dang tonsils because they're always getting infected. Okay? That's why kids often get tonsillectomy. Anyway, just talking here, just so you get it. Okay, middle ear ossicles. The malleus, incus, stapes, ligaments. You got that. We covered that a while ago. Next, here's the middle ear muscles. Stapedius muscle, tensor tympani muscle. Top of page 2. I'd like to get to the bottom of page 2 before this decade is out. Okay, here we go. Stapedius muscle is short. It's attached to the neck of the stapes. It's the smaller of the two muscles, but it's the stronger of the two muscles. Strong, small but mighty. The tensor tympani muscle is much larger, but it's a sluggish, weak thing. The tensor tympani is attached to the manubrium of the malleus. But look at what we say here, innervated. Circle the word innervated. Innervated means, see, muscles don't just contract by themselves. They have to have a nerve telling them to contract. And the nerves communicate with your brain. So your brain sends a message down the nerves to the muscle to tell it to contract. Well, the nerve that's attached to the stapedius muscle is the 7th facial nerve, the smiling nerve, the one that moves your cheeks. That's a strong motor nerve. So the stapedius muscle is tough. It's the strong muscle. The tensor tympani muscle is attached to the malleus. It's a bigger muscle, but it's attached to the 5th cranial nerve. And the 5th cranial nerve is not a very strong muscular nerve. It's mostly the nerve that tells you that when someone slaps your face, it hurts. It's mostly a feeling nerve. It doesn't have much of a motor component to it, not that much. It's called the trigeminal nerve because it breaks into 3 parts. One part for the cheeks, one part's for the mandible, and the other part for the ear. There's 3 branches to it, but it's not a very strong motor nerve. Okay, so let's see if we can take a peek at those muscles again. Let's see if I can find those guys for us. Okay, tensor tympani muscles. And here's just a schematic of it. Tensor tympani muscle, stapedius muscle. Shown earlier here, I'll blow this up. See how big the tensor tympani muscle is here? Bigger but weaker. The stapedius muscle, smaller but stronger. Okay? And again here, tensor tympani muscle, is a great big thing. I'm not seeing any stapedius muscle shown here. I don't have the picture of it on this particular diagram. Don't know why, but no matter. We don't have to worry about that now. Okay, physiology of the middle ear. So if it says important, this is where you put a star by it. Remember, it's saying again, air pressure has to be even on both sides of the tympanic membrane or eardrum for the middle ear to optimally do its job. The middle ear, now circle this word too, transduces, because transduce means to change energy from one form to another form. So the middle ear changes sound waves in air that we talked about it in acoustics an hour and a half ago. It changes condensation and rarefactions into mechanical piston-like energy. That's what the middle ear does. So it changes sound waves into mechanical energy. So now the middle ear ossicles are pushing in and out of what's called the oval window. You've got like a piston. So sound energy's changed or transduced into mechanical energy. The other thing it does It overcomes the impedance mismatch. What the Sam Hill is that? This is like I was talking to you earlier a couple of weeks ago. If you have your head under a swimming pool, you're swimming, and I'm standing outside the pool, and I talk to you, you're not going to hear a word I say, because my voice sound is going to bounce right off the water. Well, guess what? The cochlea of the inner ear, the cochlea or inner ear, is also filled with fluid. So if you take a look at this here, whoops, your cochlea is filled with fluid. So airborne sound changed into mechanical energy here is not going to do very much in this cochlea because the cochlea is filled with fluid. So what does the middle ear do? Look at the size of the drum compared to the footplate of the stapes. So if we move a couple slides ahead here, you'll get to this slide. And this is where I had you do that little exercise a couple of weeks ago. And I'll have you do it again because we're talking middle ear. Put your hand to the side of your face, and now 1, 2, 3, push hard. Now put your finger to the side of your face. 1, 2, 3, push hard. This hurts. This doesn't hurt. Okay? Pressure is force over an area. So sound hitting a great big eardrum, all that force is going to be converged onto a little point. And that increases sound pressure. It overcomes the impedance. You learn that in acoustics, the opposition to sound. It overcomes the impedance mismatch between air and fluid. It's like if sound hits fluid, it's going to bounce off the fluid. That's an impedance mismatch. Okay? The sound moving through the air is going to hits a different kind of medium. Instead of going through gas, like compression rarefactions in gas, now it's hitting fluid, which is much more dense, and the sound's just going to bounce right off of it. So something has to help airborne sound activate a fluid-filled cochlea, and that something is the middle ear. And that's where we can go back to our notes now and just take a bit of a read of this. Okay, take a bit of a read of our notes. Middle ear, highlighted here, overcomes impedance mismatch as sound goes from air to fluid of cochlea. Think of someone at the edge of a pool, blah, 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 okay? Everything is for a reason. The middle ear is what gives mammals like us exceptional hearing. Much better hearing sensitivity than that in reptiles and birds. Maybe this is why they don't have middle ears. They don't have middle ears. Who knows? Maybe this is what helped the little rodent-like mammals escape the big dinosaurs. Because dinosaurs can't hear worth a crap, okay? Or couldn't hear very well. Now, there is something called the Rene tuning fork test, and I wish I had my tuning fork here, but I don't. So here we're going to pretend. You take a tuning fork, like I showed you in the acoustics class, that very first slide, and you ding the tuning fork, and you put the stem of the tuning fork, I'll stop sharing here, you put the stem of the tuning fork on the mastoid bone. And you say to the person, do you hear that? So you ding the tuning fork, dong, and then you put the bottom of it against the mastoid bone. You say, do you hear that? The guy says, yup. Then you take it away and you hold the tuning fork by the ear. Do you hear that? Yeah, way louder. I'll do it again. Ding the tuning fork, hold it against the mastoid, and then hold it here. Which is louder? Did you hear it louder by bone conduction or air conduction? By bone conduction or air conduction? You should hear it louder by air conduction. Why? Because the middle ear adds to the sound pressure. The size of the drum compared to the tiny footplate of the stapes. So So the Rene tuning fork test that doctors do, named after Monsieur Rene. I didn't make it up. It's a guy who lives down in a van down by the river. Okay, ding. Hold it against the mastoid. Do you hear that? Yep. Now I'll hold it here. Is this louder? Yep. Louder than bone. Air conduction louder than bone conduction? Yep, you betcha. That means your middle ear is working properly. If this is not louder than that, then you need to go to a doctor and get an ear infection cleared up. So who experiences louder tuning fork audibility by air conduction than by bone conduction? Normal hearing does. Who else? Sensory neural hearing loss. Elderly people with sensory neural cochlea-caused hearing loss. Why? Because they have nothing wrong with their middle ear. Their middle ears are working just fine. The outer ear is working just fine. There's no wax in there. Everything's good. The problem is in their inner ear. But because there's nothing wrong with the middle ear, thumb, the tuning fork. You hear it by bone? Yeah. How about now? Oh, yeah, it's louder. Okay? How much does the middle ear improve things? How much? Have a peek here. The middle ear improves the sound by about 30 to 35 decibels. About 30, and you're going to learn what decibels are next week in acoustics class. Okay? But the Rene tuning fork is an eloquent demonstration of what the middle ear adds. You will be learning this again in audiometry in OTC's HIS course 130. You will be hearing that. So same thing. Okay? All righty. Good stuff. Share screen again. All right. Let's look at our PowerPoint. Our procedure. It compares clients' own hearing levels by air conduction and by bone conduction. How is it done? And you'll learn to do this yourselves. Ask client which tone is loudest, when the tuning fork is next to your outer ear or when it's held against the mastoid. The normal ear should hear the tone louder when the fork is at the outer ear, heard by air conduction. This is because the middle ear amplifies sound, and bone conduction alone does not involve the middle ear. Right now, since we've got about 10 minutes left, I want to ask you right now, do you have any particular questions so far? How's this going, this particular lecture today? You okay with all this?
I do have a question.
Go for it.
Where did I don't have those notes.
Ah, you don't have those notes. Okay, you got to go in.
What I printed don't look like that.
Ah, you got to go into Canvas. Okay, go into 120.
Right.
And then print up, go into Unit 3. Unit 3.
I did the same thing when I first joined, and so that's why I actually took a second to go into Unit 3 and print mine off too.
Yeah, you'll find it in Unit 3. Okay, and then you scroll, you open up Unit 3 and you go down, 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 and you'll see the PowerPoint and the notes in red and in blue. Okay, so you will have these.
I guess I printed the wrong ones.
Yeah, which ones did you print? What does it say on the ones?
One of them says, this was one from a couple weeks ago, the overview, the anatomy, physiology of the ear.
Yeah.
Then, I've printed all of them for the whole semester. I've gone in there.
Okay, so you should have this one then.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking at, and I even did a little, because I work at a print shop.
Yeah,
so
okay, cool.
And
so then your outer ear, your overview of the whole ear, what's the next one? It should be just outer ear. So I'll just let you scroll with me a second, okay?
I think I need to go back and check because it's not what.
Okay.
I'm talking about. So I'll go back and look.
Okay, no, I bet you will. Not a problem. Okay, good stuff. At least we now know. All right. If I share screen here again and we look at this particular section here, this is what we will finish with. There are several ways in which the middle ear overcomes that impedance mismatch. There's 3 different ways. The first way is what we've already described. Okay? The first one is this. The area of the tympanic membrane is larger than the footplate of the stapes. Okay, that's the first one we know. And again, I'll give you an analogy here. This is much like, say you're laying on your back watching TV on your carpet. You're just laying on your back, and I'm your roommate, and I walk up to you and I take a cinder block and I put it on your tummy, right on your belly. You're going to go, get that off of me. What if I had a nail on the end of that cinder block? I put it on your tummy. You'll take a dirt nap. You're dead. Okay? Pressure is force over an area. And that's the number one way that the middle ear overcomes that impedance mismatch. Okay? We discussed that one, the size of the drum relative to the footplate of the stapes. The second way is this. We now look at the leverage action. So I'm going to talk about, let's see if I've got a decent picture of that. Nah, not that one. That's stupid. Let's look at this one here. Let's see if I've got it here. Okay, carry on. Right here. Perfect. It's this. Yeah, my internet connection is unstable. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Look at this picture. See the line I drew here? The malleus bone is a little bit longer than the incus. And this is the fulcrum. This is the line upon which the malleus and the incus are moving. That's the joint. And the fulcrum goes right through the ball here of the malleus through the short process of the incus. So when the malleus is pushed in, the incus is moved out. But just like a teeter-totter or seesaw, okay? Here, you've got the same length on either side of the fulcrum. But in the middle ear, the malleus is a little bit longer than the incus. So you get an added increase of pressure because of that. Just like when you're going on a teeter-totter or seesaw with a kid, you give the kid the long end and you sit on the short end so that you can balance each other out. Okay, it's the same thing. So the malleus bone is a little bit longer than the incus. Okay, so acting like a teeter-totter or seesaw, this method increases the pressure by 1.3 to 1. Over here, 17 to 1 pressure increase. Over here, 1.3 to 1 increase. And the last one is the fact of the eardrum itself. Here's the eardrum, and notice that the eardrum doesn't all wiggle the same. The eardrum actually has some buckling action to it. You see these dashes? Because of that kind of movement of the eardrum, there is a 2 to 1 pressure increase. So now in summary, you've got 17 to 1, 1.3 to 1, 2 to 1, and you multiply these all together and you'll get a 44 to 1 pressure increase. And next week when you learn in acoustics about the decibel, you'll figure out what this pressure increase corresponds to in decibels. If you increase the pressure by 10 times, you go up 20 decibels. If you increase the pressure by 100 times, you go up 40 decibels. Well, the middle ear increases pressure by 44 times. That's somewhere between 10 and 100. And mathematically, that pressure increase works out to about 30 to 35 decibel increase. So that's what the middle ear does. It adds pressure so that airborne sound can activate a fluid-filled cochlea. And I would say that there is a great spot to end today's talk on middle ear. Next week, we'll finish the middle ear section, and we'll talk more about pathologies of the middle ear. We'll talk more about the acoustic reflex and what it does, and why you have it, and how that works. But basically, that would be about it for now. Hopefully, we'll all print up our notes out of Unit 3, and I'll just say that for the benefit of others who are listening to this recording. Cheers. You know what? Never feel. You know what I did one time? I did a whole lecture like this and forgot to hit the record button. Your reality sucks, man. You know what I had to do? Go right back on and talk to a blank computer screen and do the whole damn thing over again. That's why I never forget to push that record button. So it happens. Shift happens. All right. Live long and prosper. We'll see you next week, okay?
All right. See you next week.
All right. Good stuff.